Hey guys, Bima here today with the very first tournament report update for Worlds Beyond. So this will be week one. We're covering two tournaments today. One of them will be a Japanese tournament, and the other one will be Gengur's global launch tournament with I think 128 players, 2 decks are a ban, and players could switch deck lists but not classes in between rounds. I think in practice, most people didn't really switch the deck list. The champion said he didn't change his deck list at all. But let's get right into it. So this Shadowverse Worlds Beyond CCG master website. So you can toggle between tournaments with this tab here. So we currently have Gengur's launch tournament selected. First thing you're going to notice is there was a lot of Artifact Portal in the top card. Basically, almost every player brought Artifact Portal. And it's no surprise. I mean, I predicted as early as the 20th of June that Artifact Portal was the best deck in format. I deliberately put it by itself because I really just think it's that much stronger than the other decks. I think if I were to change the tier list, I would probably move Ramp Dragon down and mid-range sword back to tier 2. But I think it's very clear Artifact Portal is just the best deck right now. So as to why this deck is so strong, Artifact Portal, is because it doesn't have any bad matchups. Essentially, it can adapt to any game plan because of the fact that you can fuse the artifacts to what you need to win the matchup. And a lot of your cards are well statted. You have an early game, you have a mid game that is broken thanks to Alouette. So her Evo is probably like one of the most broken Evos in the game right now. I know people say Orcus should probably get nerfed, but I think Alouette's probably a very similar contender. Same with Sylvia. Sylvia also bridges the game, can heal, you can draw cards. And of course, Orcus in the late game, you super evo it, and it's basically 7 damage to face. And then on top of all the random chip damage, if your opponent just can't clear your board for a single turn, it's very dangerous for them. So this deck is kind of insane. I think the main tech card to call out here is that he runs 2 copies of Ancient Cannon. Now, Ancient Cannon is not run by every Artifact Portal deck, but this is very good if you're expecting a heavily board-based meta, right? Because the moment you get this down, it means the opponent will probably not be able to hold a board against you for the rest of the game. So this doesn't do anything against decks that don't really build a board, but against decks that do, yeah, it's pretty strong, especially against Sword. And then moving on, he also ran mid-range Sword, so it's a pretty standard list. You'll notice that he runs the bare minimum amount of Sword cards, so he runs the neutral package, so 2 Bellringer and 2 Cherub. So these are draw cards, but primarily they're also to make it that you're only running the strongest sword cards available so that your Amelia basically has the thinner pool to get the best kind of sword cards, right? And then overall, I would consider mid-range sword to be like almost like a control deck in the current meta. Of course, if your opponent can't answer your early game board, then you can buff it with cards like Iron Crown Majesty, or alternatively evolve your forecast. So Zirconia is very strong. If your opponent doesn't have the board, you buff it, you swing 1 billion damage, and then you don't have to play for the late game, and then you finish them with Albert with either an Evo or a Super Evo. So it's potentially 10 to 12 damage. So you only really need to do 8 damage, and then the rest is Albert will finish it for you. And this deck has a lot of removal that doesn't necessarily require Evo. So it lets you control the Evo points and eventually go for lethal when your opponent is either out of Evo points or they took too much chip damage and can Albert to kill them. So this deck as well doesn't have too many bad matchups, I think, in general. It's strong across the board. It's definitely weaker than Artifact Portal, but I think it's simple to play, a straightforward game plan, and there are just some games where you're just going to win just by playing normally. So yeah, mid-range sword, good deck. We're not going to go into this Artifact Portal too much, but I will say that instead of running the 5-cost cannon in order to get the removal, they have opted for the more puppet package. So these two puppet, this puppet card here and this one, basically they help you control the board early. You can control it before turn 5, whereas this one is kind of locked to turn 5. So I would say this one's better against sword, but this one's better against like, forest, for instance. But yeah, Artifact Portal, nothing more to say. I mean, it's pretty similar to the other one. We don't see too much Yudi, but I mean, it's a 3/3, draws a card, and then when it evos, it can heal you, and chip healing is actually quite important in the current meta. Felbus Rune, another strong contender for one of the best decks of the format. So this deck actually has a pretty decent matchup against Artifact Portal because it can remove the board and it can go extremely wide and with huge followers as well. And it's not always that easy for the Artifact Portal to necessarily clear it. So I think this deck is very explosive. It is a little bit weak in the early game, admittedly, but when you get to the late game, it's probably one of the strongest decks. You can go Cocytus, and then you can play Dimension Climb, and then super. And if you draw into Astaroth off the Cocytus deck, you can play it and then super Evo Cocytus and get lethal right away. But you don't have to. I mean, you can just hit the 5 cost that does kills 2 followers and does 6 damage to face. You can even play 2 of those, and it's usually game anyway. So Spellboost Rune, as always, extremely strong deck. Unsurprisingly, right? All 3 of the legendaries are very, very strong. So weakest, a competitive CO player. He's also running Artifact Portal, and then he's also running Ramp Dragon. So Ramp Dragon, well, okay, this isn't Ramp Dragon. This is Base Dragon. We should probably recategorize, to be honest. But I think the interesting thing about this deck list, though, is that we don't typically see Dragon Sign being played in this deck list. Is like Ramp is strong, don't get me wrong, but I think with a deck like this, you can also just tempo out of them. But obviously, against some decks, Dragon Sign makes a huge difference, right? Where, for example, if you're getting Forte out a turn earlier, or if you're getting this guy out, Sahar, Stormwave Dragoon, evolving the 5/5 dragon that comes out with Intimidate can be quite hard to deal with if you don't have the exact perfect removal. And in this type of tournament, I can't remember if it's open deck list, but you can kind of play around what removal you know that they're running. So there's always that option. But essentially this deck, I did actually a video on this, so you can check out my version of the list. But essentially this deck, early game, you have like your strong 2 costs, try to get some poke damage in. You eventually hit your Intimidate, your Storm, hit their face, hit their face, hit their face. Eventually they'll die. That's pretty much it. But yeah, this list is a bit interesting actually. He runs Cell as well, so when you see people card Storm as well. So when you're at higher play point count, you can do a lot more creative kind of plays. So I think this list definitely worth checking out. It's a different take from the ones I've seen. There's also a Japanese list where they run, what is it, where they run the Fan of Otohime. So yeah, this one's probably one of the more interesting lists that I'm seeing in this tournament right now. Spellboost Rune again, unsurprisingly, it's a very strong deck. Pixie Forest, I actually think this was underrepresented, to be honest. So this deck is very much a menace on ladder. A lot of the top Japanese players are on this, and it's very cheap to play, right? And it has a number of very strong matchups. I think it really is surprising that there's only 3 in the top card. But I mean, I guess there's only so many top tier decks that you can bring, right? Between Artifact, Spellboost, and Forest. I think those are probably the 3 best decks at the moment. Although the other 2 decks are obviously in a weaker position than Artifact. So there's a lot of competitive players. I mean, TK Rag, Glow, like these are all very strong players. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this tournament. So there's not too much variety. I think the deck which I find the most interesting is weakest Ramp Dragon, or Face Dragon, I suppose. But yeah, we'll move on to the next one. So this one's a Toreca SB Shadowverse Worlds Beyond Locals. So I think this one had 20 to 30-ish players, but the players in this tournament were really strong. I mean, we have Sure as well. So I think I did a feature match with him on my YouTube channel as well. So it's not surprising to see this guy here. I mean, he's top 70 tournaments. But we only have 3 deck lists. So we don't have first place, second place, and third place. But I think there's still interesting things to take away from this, right? I mean, first of all, Pixie Forest, as I said, I think is one of the stronger decks of the format. Took first place here, so we didn't really cover it in the previous tournament, but essentially, this deck list, the way it functions is in the early game, you don't really do much, right? Like, you only have 1 early game tempo play, and if you have it, you can snowball from that, so that would just be the Fey Twinkle Toes. If you have that, it's pretty hard for most decks to deal with it, because your fairies gain rush, and they're 2/2s, right? And you can go wide, and not every deck can deal with that if they don't draw Polo. But if you don't have that, then the game becomes a lot more of a control-ish variant. So essentially, you're just clearing the board every turn, forcing the opponent to deal with your Evos, and eventually you'll get poke damage through. Most likely, I mean, some people run the 7 cost that can super evolve, bounce, kind of swing, but in this case, it seems like it's just running a very mid-range oriented version. Running 3 Aria, which is quite rare to see, to be honest, but Aria is quite strong. You basically play on curve, and then from then on, you'll get permanent poke damage. And then when you're going for the lethal turn with Roach, you can poke with Fairy to face, and eventually you can go Roach and you can get the combo damage. The longer the game goes, the more damage the Roach is going to do. There's some pretty degenerate combos. You're not really safe in the late game, even if you're like 15 HP. So I think Super Evo was very, very kind to this deck. I feel like Cygames probably didn't properly balance around that consideration. But I think even if the Super Evo didn't give 3 damage, this deck would still be pretty insane. So yeah, Pixie Forest also is quite a skill-based deck. You'll see many turns which are very high APM. You have to think about how you're going to do it, and you can't miss lethal, otherwise this deck would just be a lot worse. Okay, next deck is Puppet Portal. So this is another deck that's been picking up in popularity in the ladder especially. So it's interesting to see that has actually converted to tournament play as well. So this deck is very much, I would say, a late game slash control deck, which is very different from previous iterations of Portal, Puppet Portal in the previous digital game. Essentially, this deck runs so much early game, strong tempo options, right, that aggressive decks can't build up a board or chip you early game. And then in the mid game, that's probably like your weakest point, but you have a lot of your puppets can trade into most mid game threats. And then after the mid game, that's when it gets kind of insane, right? Like the moment your Orcus comes online and you Evo this, it's like 7 damage to face. Potentially your main goal is to go double Orcus, and that's 14 damage. And then you can play Liam, and then Liam on Evolve gives all the puppet followers 2 damage enemy leader. So just a very simple math, right? 7 plus 7 from Orcus, right? Potentially 8 if you, depending on how you trade, right? Because you might sometimes use the Lloyd to trade, or one of the 3/3s to trade. But anyway, 8/8, and then you play this, and this is just 2/2/2/2/2/2. 8 damage because you're running an actual portal puppet deck, so you'll have the 0 cost puppet as well. So that's 8 damage, and then that's like your win condition. And not that many decks can actually clear you beforehand. And then for the games where you don't draw Liam, you can also play Rule of Cocytus. So this card, basically, the Cocytus deck means that you win every late game matchup, right? So this deck list, quite strong in my opinion. Worth consideration depending on like how your legendary pool is, but the fact that he runs 3 UD makes this out of reach for a lot of players, I think. 3 UD, 3 Orcus, but nevertheless, worth a try. The next deck is Artifact Portal. The Artifact Portal is so, I mean, we already covered this, right? I mean, we don't need to go any further. But yeah, that's basically it for the first 2 tournaments of Shadowverse Worlds Beyond. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the breakdown. And as always, you can check out all the deck lists via this website, so you can toggle around. You can also look at the win streaks as well via this tab. And then the tier list will be updated regularly. Make sure to like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll see you guys next time.